Welcome to Psychoanalytic Perspectives on Racism in America. This series explores the enduring presence of racism and the psychoanalytic mechanisms that sustain it, drawing inspiration from key works and current research. Hosts Dr. Karyne Messina and Dr. Felecia Powell-Williams explore the complexities of racism through the lens of psychoanalysis as they foster a crucial dialogue on racial inequality. Here are your hosts.
We have a very interesting lineup today of three people we want to talk about. Perhaps, Felecia, you could introduce our topic today, because I know you're quite familiar with the young man who was killed, we're going to talk about, in a convenience store. And also Cyrus was his name. And also with James Baldwin's letter that he wrote to his nephew. And also Kirkland Vaughans' article about Black boys. So, Felecia, where would you like to start?
We can start with our topic for today, the topic being the child they refuse to see, anti-Blackness, adultification, and killing of Cyrus Carmack-Belton. I think this is a really important topic today, especially looking at the child they refuse to see. And I'd like to thank you so much, Karyne, for making this topic available with me for us to just kind of explore, and hopefully for others to explore as well. And the reason why this is so important is because what we often hear about many young Black men. We hear about latency age boys. We hear about African-American adolescent young men. And we see this from this developmental stance. And what is so important here, and what I am imagining with the word unseen or refuse to be seen, is the fact that oftentimes many of our Black young men are not being considered in ways in which we see with perhaps those of different races, with white young men. Quickly, they are being seen and being positioned at early ages to be much older and treated in ways in which they are older than their counterparts. So this is really an important topic for us to think out loud about. Also, what's really important about this, and especially with Cyrus, is I think of James Baldwin's letter to his nephew, a letter that, as I read it, is filled with love and filled with concern for his nephew and preparing him for society.
If I could just add something here, I think that if a person has never thought about this before, it's very eye-opening. And it's just what you're starting to say, which is the idea that, and it's true in all three illustrations, in the illustration of Cyrus, in Baldwin's paper, and also in
Vaughan's paper.
And that is that Black boys, they don't get a chance to be boys.
They don't get a chance to be boys, but I also want to emphasize that the word boy can be used with such racial, connotation, that it's used as if as men, you're not allowed either to be a man, boys. So there's so much aggression and so much ism that's wrapped even in the word boy. So there's much here for us to explore, and hopefully for our listeners and viewers to think about as well.
Yes, and I'm glad you brought that up, boys and men. Well, I was thinking that Black boys, and these papers are very enlightening. I hope this discussion will be too. This developmental phase is taken away from them. It's as if they go from toddlerhood and being very young children to being seen as adolescents or even young adults in terms of responsibility. And they're developmentally, I don't think they're perceived in the same way.
There have been studies in the literature. The literature shows that, when you are looking at children, Black boys and white boys, and whenever there had been, I can't recall the one who did the study, but it shows often how the white boys were treated as children. These are latency age boys, and they were treated as children and given opportunities to correct, where the Black boys were not given that same opportunity, that they were consequenced, and that they were given consequences usually that you would give to someone much older, maybe, 2 years or 4 years older than them. And we see this also within the legal system. We see this in correctional facilities. We see this, oftentimes I see this when I'm working with children within the foster care system, to where children that are of color are going to be treated and consequenced very differently than their white counterparts. And so to really sit down and think about this, even with their treatment teams, even with other societal support systems, it's very difficult to think about what's actually happening here. And what's really important about this topic today is that there is something that is happening in society, and that has been happening in society for many years, where there is a dismissing or an unseen child that is there and that is passed on into a whole different place of adulthood for whatever reason one might give. But we're looking at the racism that is definitely there. So this particular topic is very important for us to discuss. And I have to give credit to Kirkland Vaughans' article and those references that he speak of in his writing, because it does address this very strongly from a developmental stance as well as social, and looking at what's happening here. And as we're talking about that, we're also aligning with James Baldwin's letter to his nephew that prepared him, hopefully, really prepared him, but a letter that was loving and concerning, but was very clear and to the point of, this is what you hold. This is what generations of your ancestors, your parents, your grandparents, this is what you carry with you. This is what they had hoped for you. This is what they struggled and sacrificed for you. But mind you, be ready and be prepared for what society has created for you and will see and think and hold you to in their way of thinking. So it is so powerful in how he presents this in a letter that was written so many years ago, that is so relevant now, relevant in many families, and especially in Black families. That letter that taught with children to prepare them for what society has, created or has in store for them to keep in mind.
Well, what I was struck by, I think what you just said is very insightful. What I was struck by in all three examples is that the parents of Cyrus and James Baldwin and Kirkland Vaughans are talking about the whole boy. And developmentally, I mean, what they're going to have to experience in the case of Cyrus, what he did experience. But it's the whole person that is so important. And I'm thinking about how, again, back to the developmental piece that's taken away from Black boys, I'm thinking about my experience many years ago as a teacher. And as you were speaking today, I was thinking about a couple of instances where these boys who were probably in the fifth grade, I had a special ed class. I think there were seven to eight children. And these Black boys were treated by the administration as if it were high school, as if they were 16 or 17-year-olds. And in comparison to the white children. And I just had that memory as you were speaking. So I just thought that I would bring that up. So it's as if you have, I'll just briefly say, Erik Erikson's 8 stages of development. It's as if a stage or two is taken away from Black boys, which I'm just sort of realizing it in a different, that perspective.
Thank you for sharing that, and as we really think about this together, that developmentally there is something that is really concerning, because there is something that is not always allowed to be for children of color, for Black boys specifically. And so given that it does take me, I think maybe today a podcast of memories, I was working with a child, a young, I want to say probably late latency Black boy. And he attended a predominantly white school. And he was beginning to address some areas in separation individuation. He was really recognizing that there was something he was discovering about himself, and that he could love, and that he can express that love in a very compassionate way. Mm-hmm. And that in the separation that he could find these loving objects, sincere objects, and that he could share in that way with those objects. Yeah. And so one day, one of his classmates, a white girl, they shared something in regards to a project that they were working on. And he leaned over and gave her a hug and a kiss on her cheek. And he thanked her with his words. And
that seems like a sweet thing.
It was a very sweet gesture. And it frightened him so that later, in the fear of his teacher, of what the teacher saw, but what the teacher also imagined, and the fantasies that the teacher began to have and how they began growing, she reported this embrace to the school, and the school reported it to the parents, who then later had meetings with the administration and with the little boy's parents about inappropriate touching. Well, and so there was so much fear and later so much aggression that came up from something that would be endearing with other boys and girls. But being this child in this environment, it became dangerous.
Absolutely.
And so oftentimes what I will see in the analytic consulting room is the danger that gets brought in, the danger within one's fantasies of what could be, whether it's rage, whether it is any type of aggression, so to speak. And how might we begin to look at this? And, I drift back to James' letter to his nephew, because oftentimes one doesn't think that this experience that this little boy had would still exist, that it would still be alive and well in the society that we exist in, but it is.
Yes.
It's unfortunately.
Yeah. I think this might be a good segue into psychoanalytic mechanisms of defense, because I think that's what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
I think that one thing that Baldwin said, and I would tend to want to blame people for these things, and in some cases that would be appropriate. But I think we need to think about defense mechanisms and how they are unconscious. And I think that people are often afraid, and they won't look into this. They won't investigate this anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
They have.
Mm-hmm.
So what pops up? Denial. What pops up? Projection. What pops up? Possibly projective identification in some cases. But I think these things, I think it's really important to remember. One thing, and I'm reading this, Baldwin said, is he's not claiming that people consciously desire harm. Now, that's all the time. Some people do. But rather, he's suggesting that people often protect themselves from painful truths by maintaining an image of their innocence. So they won't look into it, can't, won't, and they say, so I'm innocent, we're innocent, this was done to me. But that's not the whole picture. You and I know that.
That's right.
Yeah. And also people rationalize a lot. Oh, they did this to me. Well, okay, let's talk about what the underpinnings of this might be. If they did this to you, let's look at the whole story, not just the first layer, but let's go beneath the first layer. When I talk about layers, actually, it sounds like earth and dirt. I often think about water, rivers, oceans. You can look at the ocean and it may look beautiful and wonderful, but what is it that's underneath? In the case of oceans, there could be all kinds of environmental destruction. So you don't see the whole picture by just looking.
That's right. That's right. I'm drifting back to the word innocence, and I'm thinking about our topic for today and the adultification and the loss of innocence. And so as I think about this, the other thing that comes to mind for me is how adultification really allows for that racist psyche, to just escape the reality of the child's vulnerability.
Yeah.
And as we're thinking about Cyrus and that unfortunate situation, it's just so painful, but so common. Unfortunately, it's just
there's the whole thing we're talking about. If you think about the store owner chasing after Cyrus, shooting him, killing him, saying that he was worried about protecting the son. I mean, it's all right there.
But again, we have a young person here. We have Cyrus, and he's imagined as older. This gets into much of Vaughan's writings. He's imagined as an older person, and that he's harder and more threatening, and that his Blackness brings danger.
It does.
His brings danger, and we must protect ourselves from the danger.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think we could I say this often, we could talk about this for many, many segments, many podcasts, because it's tragic. Cyrus's death is tragic. What Baldwin says is so eye-opening, and what Vaughn says is as well. So we could talk for a very long time, but I think we probably need to wrap it up for today. What do you have a parting thought? And if so, what might it be?
I just sit with the tragedy of what society brings into the lives of children. And then I think about children and how in this tragic and very traumatizing world that we must give our children, and not certain children, certain populations or groups, but we need to give all of our children an opportunity to be children.
Yeah.
And as we've talked about Black boys, that, they are boys, and that boys should be given an opportunity to play, an opportunity to experience what play is about, what joys are about, what sorrow, sadness, and excitement, all of the ranges of emotions, but also to be having that opportunity and given that opportunity as freely as any group could be given, and not prepared for a system to keep them caged or incarcerated in one's own psyche because of one's own fear of how they have created this image of danger.
Yes, thank you for that. That's very inspirational. I'd just like to add one thing. I think that Cyrus's parents gave us a real gift, because as sad as they must have been, just distraught, absolutely blown away by grief, they talked about the whole boy, their full child, by remembering the positive things about him. So there would be plenty of reason to just be bitter. But they weren't. They talked about the whole person, which is, I think, what Baldwin is trying to say, and Vaughns as well. It's the whole person that matters.
That's right.
The whole boy, and including the part of development that is taken away from them. I hope that some progress can be made in that area. And if you enjoyed this podcast, or if it sparked any areas of interest, please pass it along to people you know who might also enjoy it. So thank you very much. Thank you, Felecia and
Karyne.
We'll be back again. Thanks so much.